Under the burning desert sun, a tiny lion cub lay on the edge of life, thirst clawing at his fragile body, silence closing in. No pride, no water, no chance left, until fate turned the page of his story. What happened next will leave you in awe. This story is for you. If you love powerful animal journeys like this, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. The Nevada desert in midsummer was a place where even the toughest creatures struggled to survive. The sun blazed down like a relentless torch, bleaching the landscape in harsh light and turning every rock into a furnace. For months, no rain had touched the ground. The once rolling grasslands were nothing more than a cracked wasteland, and every living thing searched desperately for water. In this unforgiving wilderness wandered a small mountain lion cub named Leo. Barely 3 months old, he should have been safe beneath the care of his mother and pride, but fate had been cruel. It began with a stampede. A herd of wild mustangs, frightened by some unseen danger, thundered across the dry plain. The earth shook as hooves pounded the ground, raising dust clouds so thick they turned day into dusk. In the chaos, the lions scattered to avoid the charging herd. Leo, too small and unsteady to keep up, was shoved aside, his tiny body tossed into the path of confusion. By the time the dust cleared, his mother and siblings were gone. Their scent vanished into the wind, and Leo was left standing alone in the middle of an empty desert, his wide golden eyes filled with confusion and fear. The first night was the hardest. When the sun dipped behind the jagged hills, the desert turned cold, the heat replaced by a bone-deep chill. Leo curled beneath a thorny bush, shivering as distant cries of coyotes and owls echoed across the wasteland. He let out soft mews, hoping his mother would return. But no answer came, only silence. Hunger gnawed at his belly, but thirst was worse. By dawn, his tongue was swollen, and he desperately licked the thin layer of dew that clung to a few withered leaves. It was gone in seconds, stolen by the rising sun. On the second day, Leo began to wander. His small paws dragged across the cracked earth, every step sending pain shooting through his tired body. His eyes, once bright with curiosity, now appeared dull and glassy. He searched for tracks, scents, anything that might lead him back to his pride, but the desert gave him nothing. The drought had erased even the smell of life. Twice he collapsed, too weak to rise, but instinct pushed him forward. Somewhere deep within his fading strength, the will to survive remained. By the third day, the little cub was barely recognizable as the playful creature he once was. His ribs pressed sharply against his skin, his fur clumped with dust and sweat, his mouth cracked and dry. He tried chasing a lizard once, but his legs failed him, sending him tumbling onto the dirt. For hours, he wandered without direction, swaying, stumbling, then standing again with sheer willpower. Every breath was ragged, shallow, as if the desert itself was stealing the air from his lungs. Finally, when the sun reached its cruelest height, Leo caught something faint, an unfamiliar scent drifting through the scorching air. It was strange, unlike anything he had smelled before. The bitter trace of metal, the faint tang of rubber, and most importantly, the life-giving promise of water. Though his vision blurred and his paws trembled, the cub turned toward it, dragging himself step by step, guided only by instinct. His tiny body swayed with each movement, and twice he collapsed into the dust, but the scent was enough to keep him moving. At last, the desert road appeared before him, a strip of black asphalt slicing through the wilderness. To Leo, it was an alien scar on the land, shimmering under the heat waves. But to his desperate senses, it was the direction of hope. Summoning the last of his strength, the cub crawled forward. Each inch was a battle against the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. When he finally reached the roadside, his body gave out completely. He collapsed into the dirt, sides heaving in shallow breaths, eyes half shut and clouded. The desert around him shimmered, silent and empty, as if waiting to see whether this tiny life would end or be saved. And there, under the merciless Nevada sun, a fragile cub named Leo lay on the edge of death, unaware that his destiny was about to change forever. The desert road stretched empty for miles, shimmering beneath the punishing Nevada sun. On most days, nothing disturbed its silence except the occasional tumbleweed or a lone rattlesnake slithering across the hot asphalt. But on this particular afternoon, a Jeep Wrangler rumbled along, kicking up trails of dust as it made its way back from a long survey trip. Behind the wheel was Emily Carter, a 34-year-old wildlife photographer who had spent the last decade documenting the fragile beauty of America's wildlands. Her back seat was cluttered with camera gear, notebooks, and half-empty water bottles, a clear sign of someone who had spent more time chasing nature than living comfortably within it. Emily wasn't expecting to find anything unusual on her way home. The trip had been quiet, almost too quiet, as drought had silenced many of the desert's usual inhabitants. She had begun to think the entire journey had been wasted, until something small and unmoving caught her eye near the roadside. At first, she thought it was a bundle of cloth or maybe debris that had blown off a passing truck. But instinct told her to slow down. Wildlife had a way of blending into the landscape, and she had learned never to ignore even the smallest shapes in the dirt. She pulled the Jeep over, dust billowing around her as the tires crunched on gravel. Emily grabbed her camera automatically, habit more than thought, and stepped out into the dry, searing heat. The air shimmered, distorting the horizon. For a moment, she saw nothing unusual, just rocks, brush, and the same relentless emptiness she had been driving through all day. But then the shape stirred, just slightly, and her heart clenched. It wasn't a scrap of fabric. It was alive. Emily rushed closer, careful not to startle the creature. What she found stopped her cold. Lying half-buried in the dust was a mountain lion cub, its tiny sides rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Its fur was coated in dirt, its eyes half-closed, glazed with exhaustion. The poor thing looked more spirit than flesh, a fading ember of life in a place that had already claimed so many. Emily dropped to her knees, the desert heat forgotten. "Oh my God," she whispered, reaching out a tentative hand. The cub made no move to run. It didn't even have the strength to flinch. Instead, its weak gaze met hers for a moment, and something inside Emily shifted. She had photographed wild animals her entire career, but this was different. This was no distant subject through a camera lens. This was a desperate plea for help, silent but undeniable. Emily pulled her canteen from her belt, unscrewing it with trembling hands. She poured a small amount into the cap and carefully placed it near the cub's mouth. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the cub's dry tongue flicked out, lapping weakly at the water. It was barely a sip, but it was enough to prove there was still fight left in him. Her chest tightened. This little creature had been hanging on to life by sheer will, waiting for a chance. And by some impossible twist of fate, their paths had crossed in the middle of this barren desert. Emily knew she couldn't just leave him. The cub wouldn't last another hour in this heat, and even if he somehow did, the night would bring coyotes and cold that would finish what thirst had begun. She had only one choice. Setting down her camera, she removed her light jacket and gently scooped the cub into her arms. His body was frighteningly light, as if every ounce of strength had already been stripped away, but the faint thump of his heartbeat against her arm gave her a surge of determination. "I've got you," she murmured softly, as though the words alone might keep him tethered to life. With great care, she carried him back to the Jeep, placing him on the passenger seat and wrapping him in her jacket for warmth. He let out a faint whimper, so weak it barely registered, but to Emily it was enough. It was proof that he hadn't given up completely. As she started the engine, Emily realized this wasn't going to be a simple act of kindness. The cub's condition was critical, and time was not on their side. The nearest wildlife rehabilitation center was over 2 hours away, and every minute could mean the difference between survival and loss. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, dust clouds rising behind her as the Jeep lurched forward. For Leo, the cub who had been moments from death, destiny had shifted in the blink of an eye. The desert had nearly claimed him, but now, in the care of a stranger, a fragile spark of hope flickered back to life. The long drive across the desert felt endless. Every bump in the road jolted the fragile cub in Emily's jacket, making her fear he might slip away before they even arrived. She kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently on the bundle beside her, whispering quiet reassurances as though her voice alone could anchor him to life. At last, the beige buildings of the Nevada Wildlife Rehabilitation Center came into view, rising from the scorched landscape like an oasis. Emily pressed harder on the gas, relief flooding her veins. When she screeched to a stop at the entrance, a team was already outside. The staff had been alerted by her frantic call from the Jeep's satellite phone. Among them was Dr. Jonathan Hayes, a seasoned veterinarian with decades of experience saving wild predators. His hair was streaked with gray, his sun-weathered face set with calm authority. Without hesitation, he lifted the cub from Emily's arms and rushed inside, the staff moving like clockwork around him. The sterile brightness of the clinic was a stark contrast to the desert's dusty silence. Emily followed, her heart pounding, as Leo was laid carefully on a stainless steel examination table. Monitors beeped, gloves snapped, and the quiet room became a flurry of motion. Dr. Hayes leaned close, his hands steady as he checked the cub's vitals. Severe dehydration, malnourished, complete exhaustion, he said in his deep, clinical tone. But no major injuries. This little one has been fighting hard. Emily stood frozen, barely breathing as she watched nurses draw blood, insert in 4-line, and gently clean the dirt from Leo's fur. His tiny body was frighteningly still, responding only with faint twitches as the fluids began to drip into his veins. The vet's expression was unreadable as he listened to the cub's chest with a stethoscope. After a tense pause, he nodded. His organs are functioning, for now. You brought him just in time. Another few hours in, he trailed off, shaking his head. The message was clear. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had photographed life and death countless times in the wild, but this was different. This wasn't distant. She had held this fragile life in her arms, and had felt his weak heartbeat against her chest. Losing him now would feel unbearable. The first night was brutal. The staff worked in shifts, monitoring Leo's vitals, adjusting his fluids, and feeding him a nutrient-rich formula through a tube. Emily refused to leave. She sat in a corner chair, eyes never straying far from the cub. She cleaned his small wounds, kept him warm, and whispered encouragement whenever his tiny body trembled. Then, on the evening of the third day, something extraordinary happened. Leo stood up on his wobbly legs for the first time since Emily had found him. He swayed, nearly collapsed, but then steadied himself with a soft, pitiful growl, a sound that filled the room with quiet triumph. Dr. Hayes smiled for the first time since the cub arrived. He's a fighter, he said. If he keeps this up, he's going to make it. Relief washed over Emily, her eyes stinging. She leaned closer to the cage, whispering, "That's it, little one. You're stronger than this desert. You're going to make it." And for the first time, Leo's eyes, once dull and lifeless, shone with a spark of vitality. The battle wasn't over, but hope had finally taken root. Weeks passed, and with each day, Leo grew stronger. His ribs, once starkly visible beneath dull fur, began to fill out with the nourishment and care he received. His coat regained a golden sheen, his paws steadied when he walked, and his once fragile cries deepened into the beginnings of a true lion's roar. Emily, who had been there since the moment he collapsed in the desert, watched every milestone with a pride she hadn't felt for anything else in years. But as much as she longed to keep him close, she knew that the true measure of this miracle wasn't found in comfort or attachment. It was in letting him reclaim the life nature had designed for him. From the start, Dr. Hayes had been careful to remind her of the line that could never be crossed. A rescue isn't complete until the wild is given back what nearly lost it. Under the careful supervision of the rehab center, Leo was gradually moved into a large semi-wild enclosure on the edge of Nevada's protected wilderness. It was here that his instincts were tested. The staff stopped bottle feeding and hand feeding him, replacing formula with small prey releases, forcing him to rediscover the skills buried in his DNA. At first, he stumbled, chasing too late, crouching too high, giving himself away before he could pounce. He grew frustrated, roaring weakly when meals got away. But day after day, he learned. Each failed hunt became a lesson, each attempt sharpening the instincts of a future predator. Emily visited often, though she maintained her distance, watching through observation blinds or camera feeds. The bond between them hadn't vanished, but she knew it had to evolve. Leo no longer approached her cage-side hand with soft eyes. Instead, he carried himself with growing independence. His muscles thickened, his eyes sharpened, and the once helpless cub now prowled his enclosure with a confidence that stirred something deep in her chest. The moment of truth came 6 months later. A transport cage was prepared, this time not for a desperate dash to save his life, but for his return to the wilderness where he belonged. Emily stood nearby, silent, as the team worked. Her heart ached, but her resolve never wavered. She had promised herself from the beginning. This story wasn't about keeping him safe forever. It was about giving him back his freedom. When the gates to the protected desert reserve finally opened, Leo hesitated for only a moment. The sun blazed overhead, casting golden light on the open expanse before him. He looked back once, just once, his amber eyes meeting Emily's across the short distance. In that glance was everything: gratitude, recognition, and the unspoken bond that would remain long after they parted. Then, without fear, Leo stepped forward into the wild grass and scrub. His stride was sure, his head lifted high. The sound of distant calls carried on the wind, the promise of a pride somewhere beyond the horizon. Within seconds, he was gone. Just another shadow moving through the land, blending into the life he was always meant to live. For Emily, the silence that followed was overwhelming. Tears blurred her vision, but they weren't born of sorrow, they were born of awe. She had witnessed something few ever would: the transformation of a dying cub into a symbol of resilience and strength. Weeks later, GPS trackers confirmed what everyone had secretly hoped for. Leo was alive, thriving, and, miraculously, he had been accepted into a pride. It was rare, nearly unheard of for an outsider to be embraced rather than rejected. Yet Leo had found a family, a role, and a purpose among his own kind. Nearly a year after the rescue, Emily returned to the observation tower that overlooked the reserve. The desert was no longer scorched and lifeless. Rains had come, painting the earth with tentative green. And there, in the distance, she spotted him. Leo was no longer a fragile cub. He was a young lion in his prime, strong, commanding, his mane beginning to thicken in the sunlight. At his side, a younger cub bounced playfully, batting at his tail. Emily watched, breath caught in her throat, as Leo responded not with annoyance, but with a gentle nudge of his head, a protector now, a guardian for the next generation. In that moment, the story completed itself. A cub saved from death had become a leader, proof that one act of compassion could ripple outward into something greater than anyone could imagine. As Emily turned to leave, the desert breeze carried with it the sounds of roars, powerful and unbroken. Leo had found his place, and she had fulfilled her purpose. This wasn't just the story of a rescued lion. It was a reminder of what's possible when humanity chooses compassion over indifference. A single drink of water, a moment of kindness, had rewritten the fate of an entire life. And somewhere out there in the Nevada wilds, the roar of a once-dying cub now echoed as a testament to survival, resilience, and freedom.